So Andrew Yang is a Democratic candidate for president of the United States. He may have been the very first to announce. Now, don't quote me on that. I'm not sure, but I know he was in just before Ojeda. I'm not sure if he was the actual first, but I mean, he very well may be. But he's a Democratic candidate for president of the United States. He went on TYT interviews. So let's watch him lay out some of his policy vision, and then we'll dive further into it.
So can you tell us what your background is and why you decided to run for president of all things?
Sure. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started an organization called Venture for America that helped create several thousand jobs around the country in cities like Detroit, St. Louis, Baltimore, and Cleveland. And I'm running for president because the reason why Donald Trump's our president today is that we automated away 4 million manufacturing jobs in Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And my friends in Silicon Valley are about to do the same thing to millions of retail jobs, call center jobs, truck driving jobs, fast food jobs, and on through the economy. So when I saw all of these problems, imagine being an entrepreneur who's created thousands of jobs and realizing that you were pouring water into a bathtub that has a giant hole in the bottom. And that's when I realized I needed to run for president in order to activate energy around real solutions to the problems that got Donald Trump elected in the first place.
So, Andrew, I take it you're going to run as a Democrat.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. And so what's your answer for how we replace those jobs, or what we do about the fact that those jobs are gone and a lot more will be gone soon?
So there's a three-step process to try and re-energize the American economy. And right now, our labor force participation rate is down to 62.9%, the same levels as El Salvador and the Dominican Republic. That's one reason why Americans are so angry and distressed. So the first step is the freedom dividend, where every American adult gets $1,000 a month, free and clear, no questions asked. It's a form of universal basic income, paid for a new tax that would fall most heavily on the companies that are benefiting the most from all of this new technology. The second part of the plan is to get healthcare off the backs of American families and businesses. I'm for single-payer Medicare for all. It doesn't make sense to tie healthcare to jobs when 94% of new jobs are temp jobs and contractor jobs that don't include healthcare. And then the third step that might be the most profound, we made up GDP almost 100 years ago. And right now GDP is leading us off a cliff because it's going to keep going up even as more Americans get left behind. So we need to modernize our economy and start measuring things that matter to the American people. Things like median income and affordability, childhood success rates, mental health and freedom from substance abuse, criminality and recidivism, environmental sustainability, create a more human-centered economy, what I call a trickle-up economy from human beings, families, and our communities up.
He's an absolutely fascinating candidate, and from what I can tell, the main thing he's running his campaign on is universal basic income. So on that alone, I think he's a welcome voice to the debate stage, assuming he gets there. Hopefully he does. And I think it's important that this issue is front and center in the American public, and they get familiar with it, and they understand, like, oh, no, it's not. Because I was even the kind of person where I thought, come on, I thought there's no way that that's feasible, that we can't do it for economic reasons. But it turns out, I mean, Andrew Yang is a perfect example of a guy who is an entrepreneur. He is a businessman. He says he believes in, I think he calls it human capitalism. So we keep the capitalist system in place, but we do massive reforms that are like pro-human beings. But bottom line is, of course it's feasible. Of course you could do it. I mean, guys, we're a government that waged a $7 trillion war in Iraq, a $2 trillion war in Afghanistan. We do corporate welfare to the tune of billions of dollars every single year. We did a multi-trillion-dollar bailout of Wall Street. There was no blinking for saying yes to all these ideas, but you're telling me we can't afford Social Security for all? And by the way, that's what it is. And I would love it if instead of everybody calling it universal basic income, we all started calling it Social Security for all, because that's what it is. In the same way that we're talking about Medicare for all, we should talk about Social Security for all. So it's just a little bit of money every month so that you're all right. And it's not totally a dog-eat-dog world out there, and you could take care of the bare minimums. If you're in between jobs, you're looking for a job, you're in a weird point in your life for whatever reason, life hits people over the head, man. It's not easy. Sometimes life is really difficult. So why would we not want to lend a little bit of a helping hand to people as opposed to doing all these regime change interventionist wars, doing corporate welfare out the wazoo and all these other things? I used to not think it was economically feasible. Now I'm looking at myself like, how could you ever have thought universal basic income was not economically feasible? So I'm pro Social Security for all, and I'm happy that we have a voice in the race who's running on it, and he's unapologetic in that respect. And also, it's funny because you would expect somebody who's running on universal basic income, and this would be incorrect to expect it, but you would expect it to be more of a socialist. But no, this guy says I'm a human capitalist, and I believe in human capitalism, or whatever he calls it, and this is one of my ideas that I care deeply about. So I love that he's running on that. Now, other things he's running on, he says Medicare for all. That's the biggest one, honestly, the most important one. But then also, I went to his website and read through a bunch of the stuff. There's a lot of good stuff there. Legalize marijuana, paid vacation time by law. This is another issue that, unfortunately, many other people are not talking about. If I'm not mistaken, I think Bernie supports it, but he just doesn't talk about it as much as he talks about the other issues. Net neutrality is also in his platform. Now, here are the areas where he loses me, where I don't agree with him. So one of the things he wants is a news and information ombudsman. And, I read the platform on that, the plank on that, and he basically says, hey, listen, we got a lot of fake news out there. It does a lot of damage in our country. We should have a news and information ombudsman to penalize people when they push fake news. Couldn't disagree more. Listen, I deeply, deeply believe in the First Amendment. I believe in free speech. I believe in a free press. And any attempts of the government to regulate that are always going to backfire. Always. Always, always, always. And, one of the things his quote on this is something like, oh, I believe in free speech, but anytime you say that, we're off to a bad start. I believe in this, but. No but. No but. Actually, to be fair, you can say, well, we already have, you can't do libel, you can't do slander, but they're notoriously hard to prove, which is a good thing. You can't do libel, can't do slander, can't do direct threats of violence. That all makes sense. That all should be illegal. But outside of the bare minimums, we have to overwhelmingly lean on the side of free speech because, Andrew, I got news for you. The reality is, even if we had a news and information ombudsman, they would almost certainly let the establishment media get away with their lies, like the lies that led to the Iraq War, and they're pushing us towards a war in Iran now, among many other things. They wrongly go after Ocasio-Cortez over Medicare for all and tell her, oh my God, how are you going to pay for it, even though it saves $2 trillion? But when the government is responsible for policing this stuff, the people who have institutional power are going to get away with their lies, and they're only going to go after independent outlets. And you might say, well, hey, listen, we got to go after the Alex Jones types. I think he's gone after himself enough. He kind of delegitimizes himself with a lot of the stuff he says. You don't need to penalize him, make him a victim with government persecution, and then kind of feed into that narrative that the right has. So it's just not a good idea. Just hands off the press, hands off free speech. I get it. On the absolute fringes, you have cases where there is some legal, there is some legal action taken in absolute fringe cases. But outside of that, man, no. I wouldn't even ban or punish the worst of the worst. The Fox Newses, the Newsmaxes, the Daily Callers. They're dead wrong, and I will expose the shit out of them, but I don't need to, use irrational and unnecessary government overreach in order to defeat them. Okay. There's another plank about reducing harm to children caused by smartphones. I just don't agree that that's an area that the government should get involved. Plus, I don't even know how the government would get involved, and that seems very vague to me. He says he wants to limit bureaucracy in the federal workforce. This is where I start to really disagree with him. He talks about, we have over 2 million federal government employees, and you have all these other companies, Amazon, they can do with what they do with a lot fewer employees, so we need to reduce the number of employees. I just don't believe that that's anything we should focus on or put an onus on. Is it possible that if I was president, for whatever reason, I would limit the government workforce by a couple thousand or 100,000 for whatever reason? Yeah, it's possible. But to have that as a goal, no. What if, for example, with new job creation and a New Deal, you actually increase the government workforce, and you, instead of 2.3 million or whatever it is, you have 3 million government workers. I don't think that is, by definition, a bad thing at all. So I would never focus on like limiting bureaucracy as a point, and that seems to me like it's a very it's like a right-wing thing. This idea of, well, obviously we all agree that the government's too big, so let's work to go in the opposite direction. Well, what if I don't agree with that? I don't. I think it depends. I think what do we need these people in the government to be doing, and what size government do we need in order to deal with the issues that we're facing? And so I have no hard rule of we should reduce it or we should grow it or we should keep it the same. I'll take those issues as they come at me. I don't want to try to work towards some sort of non-ideal that he seems to think is an ideal of a smaller government workforce. And finally, he says he wants to automatically sunset old laws. Yeah, that one, I don't get this one at all. Like, he explains how old laws become obsolete sometimes very quickly, and there's no reason for them to be on the books, so let's do an automatic sunset on old laws. No. Just no. I don't see how that's reasonable. Like, look at something like Glass-Steagall. The problem was that we got rid of it. Imagine if we had put it into place and then it just expired a few years after anyway. No. I mean, I think, as a general rule, in most cases, the regulations that are on the books of business are usually there for a reason. Now, sometimes it's burdensome red tape, and we can get rid of the burdensome red tape wherever it is. But I think as a general rule, most of the regulations that are there actually make sense. It makes sense to have rules that regulate, how your elevator is running and how often the government inspects it. It makes sense to have regulation of Wall Street like Glass-Steagall. It makes sense to have child labor laws in place. It makes sense to still have a constitution. I think we could do improvements on the Constitution for sure. But to have a constitution, a supreme law of the land, the idea is like just sunset it after a while. And to be fair, I don't know if he's talking about the Constitution. I think he's just talking about laws that are passed through legislation. But no, I wouldn't have an automatic sunset clause on laws, because I think that's way too broad of a way to think of all the different laws. They're each individual, and you need to go on a case-by-case basis. You shouldn't just automatically sunset them. But anyway, that's my long rant on Andrew Yang. I think there are many, many positives to having his voice in this race. And in general, I like him. But there are some areas that I have disagreements. And I'll be doing this with all the candidates. I did it with Richard Ojeda before, told you all the things I like and all the negatives, and I'll did the same with Yang here, and I'll continue with all of those candidates in this respect.